Go and look at your rose bush right now. Somewhere in the middle of it, there's a cane that is thick, gray, and covered in scaly bark that flakes off when you rub it. It is the biggest piece of wood on the plant. It looks like the trunk. It looks like the part holding everything together. That cane hasn't produced a decent flower in 2 years, and it is quietly starving the ones that could. Most people leave it standing because it looks important. Then they spend the rest of the season wondering why their rose gives them 4 flowers and a lot of leaves. Pruning a rose isn't tidying a rose. It's a series of decisions, and each one has a consequence you will be looking at for the next 12 months. So here are 7 rules. Not 7 tips, rules with the reason behind each one, so that by the end of this video, you're not copying a cut you saw someone else make, you're deciding where your rose grows next. Rule 1. Decide the shape before you make the first cut. Here's the thing almost nobody tells you when they hand you a pair of cicaders. The bud you leave at the top of a cane is the bud that takes over the plant. Roses run on apical dominance. The bud at the tip of a cane produces hormones that travel downward and suppress the buds below it. That's why an unpruned rose gets taller and leggier every year, while the bottom half goes bare and woody. The tip is winning. The moment you cut that tip off, the suppression lifts, and the highest bud you left behind becomes the new leader. It wakes up and it grows in whatever direction it happens to be facing. So, look at the cane. Find the bud you want to cut back to. Look at which way that bud is pointing. If it points inward toward the middle of the plant, that's where the new cane is going, straight into the congested center, rubbing against its neighbors, blocking airflow, sitting in shade. If it points outward, away from the plant, that new cane grows out into open air and light. That single choice, repeated across every cane, is what gives a rose an open, vase-like shape with a clear middle. Not a rule about shape, a hormone doing exactly what you told it to do. And decide how hard you're going before you start, because that's a trade too. A hard prune, taking canes down low, forces the plant to push a small number of very strong new shoots from a big root reserve. Fewer flowers, but bigger ones on stronger stems. A light prune leaves more buds, so the plant spreads the same energy across many more shoots. More flowers, smaller on thinner wood. Neither is wrong, but you should know which one you're choosing before your first cut, not discover it in June. Quick one. If you actually want a step-by-step guide for all this, maybe your plant's struggling, or you just can't get it to bloom, I put every fix into one cheat sheet. You get everything in my Plant Fix and Bloom cheat sheet. It's the first link in the description. Let's continue. Rule 2. Find out which wood your rose flowers on before you touch it. This is the rule that saves entire seasons, and it's the reason so many people are convinced their rose is broken. Some roses flower on wood they grew last year. Old garden roses, most ramblers, many once blooming climbers. They spent all of last summer building the exact canes that carry this year's flowers. The flower buds are already there, sitting dormant on that wood. If you go out in late winter and cut those canes back hard, you are cutting off every single flower before it opens. The rose grows back beautifully, green and healthy, and gives you nothing. And because it looks so healthy, you assume it needs more feeding, more sun, more something. It doesn't. It needed you to leave it alone. Those roses get pruned right after they finish flowering, in summer. You cut then, and the plant has the whole rest of the season to build next year's flowering wood. Then there's the other group. Hybrid teas, floribundas, most modern shrub roses, most of the repeat flowering English roses. These flower on wood they grow this season. New growth, new flowers. So you prune them in late dormancy before growth starts, and every shoot you provoke is a shoot that can bloom. 2 groups, 2 completely opposite timings. So before anything else, find out which one is standing in your garden. If you don't know the variety, the flowering pattern tells you. If it gives you one big flush and then stops, treat it as a once bloomer and prune after it flowers. If it keeps coming back through the season, it's flowering on new wood, and late dormancy is your window. Rule 3. Let the buds tell you when, not the calendar. You've probably heard a month. Somebody's grandmother said February, somebody's book said March, and then people in completely different climates repeat those months to each other as if the rose can read. The rose is not watching the calendar, it's watching temperature. What you're actually waiting for on a repeat flowering rose is the moment the buds along the canes begin to swell, when those little dormant eyes go from flat and tight to plump and reddish, just as the plant starts stirring, but before it has committed to real growth. Why that moment? Because pruning is a wake-up call. When you cut, you release the buds below the cut and they push. If you prune too early, during a warm spell in deep winter, you tell those buds to grow while frost is still on the way, and the tender new growth they produce gets killed. The plant spends stored energy building shoots that die, and it dies back further down the cane than you cut. You've cost it twice. So watch the plant, not the date. Buds swelling, weather turning, hard frosts behind you. That's your window. And this is why autumn pruning is a mistake in most places. A cut in autumn stimulates soft growth going straight into the cold. If your roses are tall enough that winter wind rocks them loose in the soil, shorten them by 1/3 to reduce the sale. That's damage control, not pruning. The real work waits.
Rule 4. Cut to wood that can actually carry a flower. Pick up a cane and look at its thickness. If it's thinner than a pencil, it cannot support a flower. It will grow, it will produce leaves, and very often it will produce a blind shoot, a shoot that runs up, forms no bud at the tip, and just stops. People blame pests. It's usually just weak wood being asked to do a job it can't do. So when you're deciding where to cut back to, keep coming down the cane until you reach wood that is at least pencil thick. Everything above that point is passenger weight. Then there's the second half of this rule, and it's the one that separates people who actually know roses from people repeating advice. When you make a cut, look at the cut face. Look at the pith, the soft core in the center of the cane. If that pith is white or creamy green, the wood is alive and healthy, and you can stop. If it's brown, tan, or hollow and dark, that cane is dead or dying inside, even if the bark outside looks perfectly fine. And dieback travels downward. So you keep cutting, a little lower each time, checking the pith at every cut until you finally hit clean white. That's where you stop. That's where the living rose actually begins. If you don't do this, you leave dead wood standing, and the dieback simply continues down into healthy tissue over the season. One cut deeper would have ended it. Rule 5. The distance above the bud matters more than the angle. Everybody has heard the 45-degree rule. Cut at an angle, sloping away from the bud, and it's fine. The slope just sheds water off the wound so it doesn't sit against the bud. But people obsess about their protractor while getting the thing that actually matters wrong. What matters is how far above the bud you cut. Aim for roughly 5 millimeters, about 1/4 of an inch. Cut too close, right down on top of the bud, and you damage it or expose it to drying out, and it never breaks. Cut too far above it, leaving a long stub, and you've created a piece of cane with no bud to feed it and no purpose. That stub has no growth to sustain it, so it dies. And dead wood on a living plant is an entry point for canker, for dieback, for cane borers going down into the stem. That little stub you couldn't be bothered to trim is the wound that never closes. While we're here, use bypass pruners, the kind where 2 blades pass each other like scissors, not anvil pruners, where a blade closes onto a flat plate. Anvil pruners crush. They bruise the cane on both sides of the cut, and that crushed tissue dies and invites rot. And keep the blades sharp, because a blunt blade tears fibers instead of slicing them, and torn tissue is slow to seal. One last thing on wounds. A rose doesn't heal a cut. It can't regrow that tissue. What it does is compartmentalize. It walls the wound off, chemically sealing the damage away from the living tissue around it. Clean, small, well-placed cuts are easy to wall off. Ragged, crushed, oversized cuts are not. Rule 6. Take out the oldest cane every single year. Back to the gray cane from the start of this video. Roses are not one permanent plant with permanent branches. Think of them as a rotating crop of canes. A cane comes up from the base, spends a couple of years at peak performance, and then starts to decline. The bark goes gray and scaly, the wood gets hard, the flow of water and nutrients through it slows, and everything it produces gets twiggier, weaker, and less impressive. But it's still large, it's still shading the middle of the plant, and it's still absorbing resources. The plant will not remove it for you. That's your job. Every year when you prune, identify the oldest cane, thickest, grayest, most scaly, least productive, and take it right down to the base. That's called renewal pruning, and the point isn't only removing dead weight. Removing an old cane at the base is what signals the plant to send up a fresh basal shoot to replace it. A brand new, vigorous, thick cane from the bud union that will carry your best flowers for the next 2 or 3 years. That's what keeps a rose young. Not feeding, not spraying. A rose that never loses an old cane, never gets asked for a new one, and slowly turns into a woody thicket that flowers at the top and nowhere else. One old cane every year, to the ground. It feels brutal, it's the single best thing you will do for that plant.
Rule 7. Watch what's happening below the graft. Most roses you buy are grafted. There's a hardy, vigorous rootstock underneath, and your chosen variety is joined onto it at a swollen knuckle near the soil line, the bud union. Everything above that union is the rose you paid for. Everything below it is a completely different plant. And that rootstock has its own ideas. It sends up its own shoots, suckers, usually straight out of the ground beside the plant, often with slightly different leaves, more leaflets, a different green, more thorns. They grow fast because rootstock is bred for vigor. And if you let them run, they will outcompete the variety above them, and the beautiful rose you bought will gradually be replaced by a vigorous, unremarkable one. People genuinely believe their rose changed color. It didn't. It got taken over. So look at the base every time you prune. Trace any suspicious shoot down. If it emerges from below the bud union, it's a sucker. And here's the part that matters. Don't snip it off at ground level. Cutting a sucker is like pruning it. You leave dormant buds behind, and it comes back with 3 shoots instead of 1. Dig down to where it actually joins the rootstock, get a grip on it, and tear it off at the point of origin. Tearing removes the growing tissue with it. Cutting invites it back. While you're down there, clear out every fallen leaf and clipping from around the base and get it out of the garden. Black spot spores overwinter on old leaves lying on the soil, and then the spring rain splashes them straight back up onto your fresh new growth. Pruning is not finished until the ground beneath the plant is clean. 7 rules. Steer the growth with the bud you leave. Know which wood your rose flowers on before you cut anything. Prune when the buds swell, not when a month tells you to. Cut back to pencil-thick wood and keep going until the pith runs white. 5 millimeters above the bud with a sharp bypass blade. 1 old cane out at the base every year, and keep the rootstock in its place. Do those things and you're not maintaining a rose anymore, you're directing it. Now, the one place people undo all of this is later in the season with deadheading, because how you remove a spent flower is a pruning cut too, and it decides whether your rose flowers again in 6 weeks or shuts down for the year. That's its own video, and I'll link it for you right here. If you found this useful, subscribe. That's what keeps these coming. And remember, if you actually want a step-by-step guide for all this, I put every fix into one cheat sheet. You get everything in my Plant Fix and Bloom cheat sheet. It's the first link in the description. I'll see you in the next one.